The letter arrived, crisp and white, tucked into my mailbox like a silent, paper-thin assassin. I knew exactly what it was before my fingers even grazed the expensive linen stock. It was the 17th official declaration of war from the Homeowners Association of the Gables, and this one was about Ol' Betsy. I'm Chad Wallace, but in this slice of suburban hell, I'm apparently the aesthetic equivalent of a cockroach. I live in one of those communities where the grass is genetically engineered to be exactly 2 inches high, and personality is considered an unauthorized structural change. And the undisputed queen of this beige, soulless kingdom? Karen, the HOA president. Yes, her actual name is Karen. You couldn't write it better. I ripped open the envelope. The subject line, printed in a severe all-caps font, read, "Immediate remediation required. Non-conforming vehicle violation. Third and final notice." I snorted, leaning back against my kitchen counter. "Non-conforming," I muttered to the empty room. Like I'm trying to wear plaid to a black tie event. Ol' Betsy, my truck, is a beautiful 2008 Ford F-250. She's not pristine. She's got a few honest scratches, a faint patina of road grime, and a color that Ford, in a moment of questionable judgment, called Desert Sunset. Karen called it a distressingly visible shade of oxidized ochre that clashes severely with the approved Gables exterior palette. This letter, though, was the final straw. It detailed, in excruciating and frankly poetic language, how my truck violated the aesthetic guidelines under 3 distinct subsections: A4, unapproved utility vehicle parking, B11, non-conforming color palette, and C9, vehicular deterioration leading to unbecoming appearance. "Unbecoming," I shouted at the ceiling, pacing the kitchen. They actually used the word unbecoming, like I'm wearing a cummerbund to a funeral or something. Betsy is just used. She works for a living. I read the final paragraph, my blood pressure spiking with every unnecessarily complex syllable. Failure to remove the non-conforming vehicle, Ol' Betsy, from the approved driveway and/or community visibility within 7 days will result in escalating fines and potential litigation to enforce community standards. Escalating fines. Litigation. All because my truck wasn't a silent, silver, electric conformity pod. I threw the letter onto the granite countertop. It felt like they weren't just attacking my truck. They were attacking my right to own a truck that looked like it had ever seen a day of honest work. My hands were balled into fists. 7 days. 7 days until they started penalizing me into oblivion. I stared out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn, the identical houses, the oppressive sameness. A cold, hard kernel of pure spite settled in my gut, quickly melting into a sudden, blinding flash of inspiration. An idea so ridiculous, so petty, so absolutely perfect that it made me laugh out loud. A deep, chest-shaking, slightly manic laugh. If Ol' Betsy was unbecoming, if she was a distressingly visible utility vehicle, then maybe, just maybe, I needed to give them something truly, undeniably, and legally offensive. Something that would make oxidized ochre look like the height of sophistication. I walked over to my laptop, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. My immediate search wasn't for a new, compliant sedan. It was for something much, much bigger. Something with tracks. Something that needed an actual license plate, but would make Karen's finely tuned aesthetic sensibilities spontaneously combust. My voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, aimed at the empty space where the HOA president's soul should have been. "Fine," I growled, a wide, slightly unhinged grin spreading across my face. You want something ugly, Karen? You want something that really doesn't conform? I'll give you ugly, and I'll park it right where old Betsy used to sit, and it's going to be 100% street legal. I typed the query, and the screen flashed with possibilities. Decommissioned armored personnel carrier for sale. The game was on. Word count, 750. The search for a replacement for old Betsy was less like shopping for a car and more like assembling a portfolio of certified metal insanity. I was deep down the rabbit hole of military surplus sites and forums, the kind of corners of the internet where people talk about transmission rebuild kits for engines that haven't been manufactured since the Berlin Wall came down. I set some parameters, given the HOA's stringent aesthetic guidelines. It had to be bigger, louder, and indisputably more utility than my F-250. My first thought was a retired ambulance. They're large, noisy, and the siren would be fun for the occasional joyride. But then I realized, too helpful, too easily dismissed as a potential, if eccentric, emergency vehicle. Plus, the flashing lights? A clear violation of the excessive illumination bylaw. Out. Next, I looked at a cherry picker. Now that was promising. Towering over the neighbor's perfectly manicured ornamental pear tree. But, again, too clearly commercial. Easy for the HOA to slap with a "no commercial vehicles stored in driveway" violation. Out. I even briefly considered an amphibious vehicle, a genuine Lark V. Imagine driving out of my garage and straight into the little retention pond. Glorious. But then I thought about the paperwork for that title. I'd be spending a year at the DMV. Out. Then, there it was. A post on a site called Tanks for the Memories Surplus. An absolute behemoth. A British-made FV432 armored personnel carrier. A genuine tank-like vehicle. Big, slab-sided, capable of ignoring potholes, and probably small shrubs. And the kicker, the glorious, beautiful detail that made my heart sing. In many states, when properly decommissioned, main cannon disabled, all heavy ordnance capability removed, it can be registered as a heavy farm/utility vehicle. It was perfect. I immediately called the number listed, which connected me to a guy with a voice like gravel and a location somewhere in the dusty middle-of-nowhere Texas panhandle. "You've reached Tank Tony's," the voice rasped. "You looking for something that runs, or something that intimidates?" "I need one that can do both," I said, trying to sound serious, despite the maniacal giggling happening inside my head. "I'm looking at the FV432, the one registered as a utility vehicle." "Ah, Karen's Bane," Tony said, and I actually paused. "Wait, you named it?" Tony chuckled, a dry, metallic sound. "Nah, son, you're gonna name it. I just call all my big track vehicles Karen's Bane. Always sells faster to guys with HOA issues." I had found my people. Tony assured me that the FV432 was road legal, had all the appropriate lighting, barely, and was street titled. "Look," he explained, "it ain't got a cannon. It's got rubber tracks for road use. It weighs a tad under 18 tons. And according to the state, it's a heavy utility tractor. Same category as those oversized things people use to plow snow in Alaska. You got a license, you got insurance, you got registration, you're legal." We haggled a bit, mostly me just trying not to sound too eager. And the deal was struck. Tony was going to arrange delivery, but first I needed the title. He FedExed the entire stack of paperwork, which looked less like a vehicle title and more like the blueprints for a small nuclear submarine. Next came the truly Sisyphean task, registering the thing in my county. I walked into the local DMV office, the one that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and crushed hopes, holding the thick folder. I took a number. F432. Appropriate. When F432 was called, I approached the counter manned by a woman named Brenda, whose expression suggested she'd already processed 18 years of misery before 9 a.m. "Next," Brenda droned, not looking up. "Hi, Brenda. I'm here to register a vehicle." I slid the stack of documents across the counter. Brenda picked up the top sheet, her eyes scanning the boilerplate text. She flipped the page, then back. Her expression went from bored misery to absolute confusion. "Mr. Wallace," she said, finally looking at me over her reading glasses, "this says FV432 MECA 2. "That's correct," I replied, trying to maintain an expression of bland normalcy. "It's a British armored personnel carrier. Decommissioned. Fully street legal." Brenda leaned in closer, peering at the tiny VIN stamped on a supplemental sheet. "And it's listed here as a heavy utility tractor, tracked." "It is. 18 tons. No cannon. Rubber road pads. Turns out, legally, it's basically a massive John Deere. Just less green." Brenda sighed, running a hand over her tightly pulled-back hair. "Mr. Wallace, I've registered everything from jet skis to Zambonis in this office, but a tank? It's an APC, Brenda. Less tank, more very angry bus." I gave her my best, most non-threatening suburban dad smile. "Look at the supporting documentation from the previous state. It's all there. Title, insurance, the whole 9 yards. If you can register a dump truck, you can register this." She spent the next hour, literally an entire hour, on the phone with 3 different supervisors, all of whom seemed to be located in increasingly obscure government annexes. I just sat there, reading an outdated DMV pamphlet on proper trailer hitch height, occasionally offering Brenda a polite, encouraging nod. Finally, she hung up the phone, placed the receiver back in its cradle with a definitive clack, and pulled out the paperwork for the plate application. "Fine," she muttered, tapping away at the keyboard. "The system accepts the weight class and utility designation. You'll receive a standard license plate. Please try not to flatten any state property with your very angry bus, Mr. Wallace." I paid the fees, took my temporary registration, and walked out of the DMV into the glorious, sun-drenched parking lot, holding the documents like the Magna Carta. The title for my FV432 APC was secured. My middle finger to the HOA was now legally sanctioned. I sent a triumphant text to Tank Tony. Paperwork cleared. Get Karen's Bane rolling. Address attached. Word count, 1,500. With the title in hand, the next phase of the operation was logistics, which, in my experience, always involves the most infuriating kind of people. Cheap contractors. I had a delicate problem. The FV432 weighs about 36,000 pounds. While I intended to park it on my driveway, it was a long-term deployment. Tracks and asphalt don't mix well, and I needed the vehicle to be visible from Karen's front window. A perfect, aesthetic middle finger. This meant the front lawn. Specifically, the corner of the lawn that was technically common area visibility, but legally my property. The key was reinforcing the ground discreetly before the 20-ton metal beast arrived. I put out a feeler for heavy equipment transport and specialized landscaping reinforcement. I, being an idiot driven by spite, chose the lowest bidder for the transport. Enter. Big Al's heavy haul. Big Al himself showed up for the site assessment, which basically consisted of him staring at my perfectly pristine two-car driveway and chewing a toothpick with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just discovered chewing toothpicks. "So you need this utility vehicle moved from Texas to here," Al summarized, not looking at me. "That's the ticket," I said. "It's an FV432, armored personnel carrier, on rubber tracks. Needs a serious flatbed." Al finally looked up, squinting. "An APC? Buddy, I move excavators. How much can it weigh?" "About 18 tons, 36,000 pounds. Al's toothpick stopped moving. He stared at me for a long, silent moment. 18 tons. For a tractor. "Heavy utility tractor," I corrected him cheerfully. "It's got a nice engine." He sighed, pulling a crumpled receipt from his pocket and scribbling on the back. His original lowball quote was clearly not going to survive this conversation. We settled on a price that was still suspiciously low for an interstate haul of a British tank. But Al assured me, "Look, I got a rig that's rated for 40. It'll handle it. Just don't ask me to stop too fast." The interaction was a masterpiece of conversational incompetence. "So, the delivery window, Al?" "Sometime next Tuesday. Or maybe Wednesday. I gotta swing by Ohio first to drop off some oversized garden gnomes. You got a lift on your end?" "No, you'll need to offload it." Al shrugged. "We'll figure it out. Gravity's always worked so far." While Al was busy contemplating the physics of gravity and 18 tons of steel, I had to deal with the second set of contractors, the landscapers. I needed a concrete pad poured beneath the sod on the front corner, just enough to distribute the weight and prevent the tracks from sinking into the perfectly irrigated soil. The irony was finding a landscaping crew who could install a tank pad while maintaining the spirit of the aesthetic guidelines. I hired Green Thumb Guys, a company whose marketing revolved around organic, low-impact, sustainable ground cover. The owner, a very earnest young man named Kai, listened patiently as I explained the bizarre project. "So, Mr. Wallace, to clarify," Kai said, jotting down notes on a clipboard made of reclaimed bamboo. "You require a subterranean, high-density concrete slab, approximately 6 by 12 feet, covered in fescue sod, capable of supporting the static weight of a small building, but you need it done in a way that preserves the visual tranquility of your curb appeal." Exactly, Kai. Visual tranquility. I'm thinking of it as a structural improvement for heavy-duty farm equipment that might be briefly parked there. Kai didn't even blink. "Understood. We'll use a low-impact mixer and ensure the sod lines are completely seamless. We can schedule it for the weekend. We'll tell the neighbors we're installing a state-of-the-art French drain system." Genius. Kai was expensive, but the sheer absurdity of burying a cement bunker in my front lawn under the guise of visual tranquility was worth every penny. The weekend job went off without a hitch, primarily because Kai's crew worked with the speed and stealth of Navy SEALs. By Sunday evening, the lawn looked exactly the same. But secretly, it was now ready for Armageddon. The day Big Al showed up was, predictably, not Tuesday, not Wednesday, but Thursday morning, unannounced, at 6:15 a.m. I was making coffee when the entire house shook with the sound of a truly distressed diesel engine trying to climb a slight incline. I looked out the window. Big Al's flatbed, which looked suspiciously like it lost a fight with a rusty can opener, was struggling to make the turn onto my street. And on the back, looking majestic and terrifying, was the FV432. It was bigger and grayer than I remembered. It was glorious. The truck ground to a halt, blocking both lanes of the main road. Al hopped out, looking like he'd just wrestled a bear and lost. "We made it," he shouted, wiping his brow. "Now, where do you want this tractor?" "Right on the reinforced corner of the lawn, Al. Just back it up slowly, then off the ramp. The process of offloading 18 tons of decommissioned military hardware was neither fast nor quiet. It involved creaking metal, groaning hydraulics, and a truly impressive amount of black exhaust smoke that temporarily blanketed the entire block. The noise was incredible. Midway through the offloading, I saw a twitch of the sheer curtains in the house across the street. Nosy Nancy, followed by the frantic, familiar sight of a cell phone being raised to her ear. Karen would be receiving the first of many updates shortly. Al finally got the APC positioned exactly where I wanted it, perfectly centered on the reinforced slab. The tracks settled onto the fescue sod, crushing nothing, sinking nowhere. It sat there, a low, gray, menacing testament to British engineering and suburban spite. "There you go, buddy," Al said, wiping oil on his jeans. "That'll be the last time I haul a tank to a subdivision, I tell you what." I paid him in cash, gave him a generous tip for the drama, and watched him drive away, his flatbed now blissfully empty and significantly faster. I walked over to the APC, laid my hand on the cold steel of the hull, and felt a surge of pure, juvenile triumph. I pulled out my phone, took a selfie with the massive machine looming behind me, and whispered to the camera, "Old Betsy's replacement. You want something ugly, Karen? I give you ugly." The phone rang instantly. It was Karen. I declined the call. The crusher had landed. Count 3,000. I slept better that night than I had in months, cradled in the warm blanket of righteous, absurd victory. I woke up to a sound I'd come to dread, but now found deeply satisfying. The rapid, staccato tap-tap-tap of expensive dress shoes on my concrete driveway. I pulled on a clean shirt, a pair of jeans, and walked out the front door, coffee cup in hand, to greet the dawn and, more importantly, my destiny. Standing rigidly on my driveway, flanking the beautiful, intimidating profile of the FV432, now officially named Karen's Bane, was the entire HOA board. Karen herself was centered, radiating an aura of suppressed rage that could probably melt chrome. Her usual tailored blazer looked slightly rumpled, a clear sign she had not slept well. "Mr. Wallace," Karen began, her voice a low, vibrating hum of outrage. "What in God's name is this monstrosity?" "Good morning, Karen," I replied, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Beautiful day for a non-conforming vehicle. Violation, wouldn't you say? Oh, wait. I mean, beautiful day for a street-legal heavy utility vehicle. This," I gestured expansively at the 36,000-pound APC, "is Karen's Bane. She's my new ride." A short, thin man from the board, Mr. Henderson, stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "This is unauthorized. It's a military vehicle. It's unsafe. It's a hazard to the community." "Mr. Henderson, I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you she is perfectly safe and perfectly authorized." I walked over to the side of the APC, where I had lovingly affixed the standard issue license plate. "See that? That's a valid state license plate. The vehicle is registered, it's insured, and if you'll recall your own letter to me last week," I said, pointing at the spot where old Betsy used to sit, "the complaint was that my truck violated 3 specific bylaws." I pulled out a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws, a document I had spent all of Wednesday night committing to memory. I read from Section B11, the non-conforming color palette rule. All vehicles parked in community-visible areas must adhere to the approved earth tone and metallic palette. Betsy was oxidized ochre, I continued. This, I tapped the APC's drab military green hull, is called field drab. It's basically a shade of mossy taupe, and if you look right here, I pointed to an obscure paint chip chart in the HOA documents. It is technically an approved earth tone, a depressing, war-ready earth tone, but an approved one. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. That's semantics, Wallace. The very nature of this vehicle is unbecoming. It is clearly a war machine. Section A4, unapproved utility vehicle parking. I shook my head, my face a mask of faux disappointment. Ah, Karen, that section specifically pertains to vehicles primarily designed for commercial or utility purposes which exceed the load-bearing capacity of a standard residential driveway. My truck, which you complained about, was pushing the asphalt. This APC? It's sitting on a specially installed subterranean concrete foundation designed to distribute its weight. The driveway is untouched. Furthermore, the state of Texas classifies this vehicle as a heavy utility tractor. Is there a bylaw that specifically prohibits the parking of a street-legal, registered heavy utility tractor on its owner's property, provided the ground cover is not damaged? Silence. Heavy, beautiful, 18-ton silence. The board members looked at Karen, and Karen looked like she was trying to calculate how much dynamite she'd need to get rid of me. We will be issuing a fine for excessive noise upon startup, Karen finally hissed, her voice shaking. Perfectly acceptable, I replied cheerfully. That's what the appeal process is for. As the board was milling around, defeated and muttering, the show really started. 2 black and whites from the local police department rolled slowly up the street, lights, flashing blue and red, pulling up behind the APC. 2 officers got out. The first, Officer Davis, was a young, stern woman who approached the scene with professional caution. The second, Officer Miller, was a much older gentleman who was clearly fighting a losing battle against a very large smile. Officer Davis approached me first. Sir, we received a call reporting an illegally parked military vehicle, possibly blocking a roadway. That was Karen, officer, I said, pointing with my coffee cup. Hi, Karen. I am the president of the HOA, officer, Karen interjected. This vehicle is a menace. Well, ma'am, we'll determine that. Officer Davis turned back to me. Sir, can I see your license and registration for this? Absolutely. I presented the documents. Officer Miller, meanwhile, was slowly circling the APC, his eyes wide. Davis looked at the registration. She looked at the vehicle. She looked back at the registration. The stern professionalism was starting to crack around the edges. It says, Heavy utility tractor, tracked, she read slowly, flipping the document. And it's fully registered with the state. A tractor, ma'am, I confirmed. I intend to use it for heavy yard work. Maybe I'll tow an extra-large mulching unit. Officer Miller clapped his hands together, unable to hold it in any longer. A tank! This is fantastic. I've been driving this route for 20 years, and this is the best thing I've ever seen. Is that a British FV-432? Officer Davis shot Miller a look, but even she was starting to lose the battle. She handed the documents back. Mr. Wallace, technically, this vehicle is compliant with all motor vehicle laws. It is legally parked on private property. The complaint is unfounded. She turned to Karen. Ma'am, unless this vehicle is actively violating a traffic law, our hands are tied. This is a civil matter for the Homeowners Association. But before they could leave, a loud, obnoxious whirring noise descended on the street. A small drone, piloted by a giggling neighbor's kid, was buzzing around the APC. And then, a slightly larger commotion. A battered news van with a local station logo screeched to a halt further down the street. The kids' drone footage of the police interaction posted 10 minutes ago had already gone viral. A reporter and a cameraman rushed toward me. I knew exactly what to say. "Mr. Wallace, we're live on Channel 9. We understand the HOA demanded you remove your pickup truck for being ugly, so you bought this instead. Is that true?" the reporter asked, shoving a mic in my face. I stood next to the APC, holding my coffee mug. It's true. They called my honest truck unbecoming. They wanted compliance. I gave them compliance. This is a street-legal, registered, insured, heavy utility vehicle. It's an approved earth tone. I followed the rules so perfectly that the rules broke themselves. And frankly, this thing gets better gas mileage than the HOA's budget. It's a win-win. The cameraman zoomed in on the license plate, then on Karen's horrified face. Officer Miller gave me a subtle thumbs up from his cruiser. The HOA board was in full, panicked retreat. Word count, 4,000. The next 48 hours were a blur of minor celebrity, media frenzy, and escalating acts of passive-aggressive neighborhood defiance. The news clip went national, instantly becoming the lead story on every Local Man Fights HOA with Absurdity segment. They called me the Tank Crusader. I loved it. Karen's Bane had become more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of rebellion against the tyranny of forced beige and mandated perfection. The neighbors, who had previously only offered me strained nods over perfectly trimmed hedges, began showing their true colors. First, a small handwritten note was taped to the APC's hull. "Thank you for your service. The beige must fall." Then came the offerings. Someone left a 6-pack of craft beer nestled in one of the rubber tracks. A retired gentleman 2 doors down, Mr. Peterson, a known silent victim of a protracted battle over the precise shade of his front door paint, attached a small, perfectly painted Target sticker to the back hatch. "Just for show," he mouthed at me from his driveway, winking. My front lawn, which for years had been a source of anxiety and constant scrutiny, was now a public art installation. People were driving slowly past, taking photos and cheering. It was glorious chaos. Meanwhile, the official channels of the HOA were in complete meltdown. I received an email from Karen, this time not on linen stock, but a frantic, all-caps message from her personal account. "You have caused irreparable harm to our property values and community reputation. Cease and desist all media contact." I responded with a single word: no. The fallout from the media attention and the neighborhood's sudden enthusiastic support was forcing the HOA's hand. They couldn't fine me because I had literally adhered to the letter of their law. Their only recourse was a complete rewrite of the covenants, a painful, drawn-out process that required an emergency vote from the membership. The notice for the emergency town hall meeting arrived quickly. Topic: Amendments to architectural, vehicle, and aesthetic guidelines. It was set for Saturday night in the community clubhouse. This was it, the final showdown, the climax of the entire ridiculous drama. Saturday arrived, and the clubhouse was packed. It wasn't just the usual 50 or so homeowners who showed up for free coffee and stale cookies. Every single person who lived in the Gables was there, plus a few people who lived in the adjacent non-HOA community just for the spectacle. I walked in wearing a perfectly tailored yet deeply sarcastic outfit. A crisp button-down shirt, khaki pants, and a custom-made baseball cap that simply read, "Ugly," Karen and the remaining board members were seated at a table, looking pale and furious. Karen tapped the microphone nervously. "Welcome, homeowners," she began, her voice brittle. "We are here tonight to address a severe threat to our community standards and property values. We must amend the bylaws to explicitly prohibit the presence of armored fighting vehicles." A murmur ran through the crowd, which Karen immediately tried to suppress. "We have prepared an amendment, Bylaw A 4.1, which explicitly forbids the parking, storage, or display of any vehicle exceeding 15,000 pounds, or any vehicle with a previous military designation, or any vehicle that—" A gentleman in the back, a quiet CPA, who usually abstained from all votes, interrupted loudly. "What about my RV? That's 19,000 pounds. "It's a different section," Karen snapped. "I'm sorry, Ms. President," I said, standing up and approaching the microphone. I was not yelling. I was just projecting my voice with a reasonable, infuriating calmness. "Before we vote on this new, frankly discriminatory amendment, I believe the floor should be opened for discussion, as per Section E14 of our existing bylaws." I approached the microphone, planting my feet firmly. "Folks, I want to be clear. I did not buy an FV432 because I have some secret desire to start a war on my cul-de-sac. I bought it for one reason, because the unelected dictators of this HOA decided that my perfectly functional, honest, working-class truck, Old Betsy, was unbecoming. They attacked my vehicle because it showed character." I paused for effect, letting the outrage simmer. The bylaws were used not to maintain the community, but to enforce a narrow, boring vision of conformity. And I followed the rules. I bought a street-legal registered utility vehicle that adheres to the approved earth tone palette. And now, because my vehicle adheres to the letter of the law but violates the spirit of their petty tyranny, they want to change the law. I pointed at the board. This isn't about property values. This is about power. They are afraid of a tractor because that tractor is a physical monument to their defeat. It is a symbol that you, the homeowners, have a voice. The CPA from the back yelled, "I vote no on A4.1. My RV needs to park." A dozen hands shot up, mostly people who were tired of being told how often they could wash their sidewalks. I took out my ultimate weapon, a large printout of Karen's first letter to me, highlighting the phrase vehicular deterioration leading to unbecoming appearance. Do we want to live in a community where a vehicle can be banned simply because a few people deem it unbecoming? I asked the room. I say no. I say let the beige fall. I say let the RVs park. I say let the tanks, the street-legal utility tractors, stay. The vote was called. Karen looked confident, believing the bylaws would pass. The room was loud, a cacophony of voices. All those in favor of amendment, A4.1, which would prohibit the presence of Mr. Wallace's vehicle and others like it, the secretary called. A few hands, mostly the board members and their immediate neighbors. All those opposed. Nearly every single hand in the room shot up. The sheer volume of the opposition was deafening. The motion failed spectacularly. The CPA started cheering. A middle-aged woman in the front row stood up and high-fived me. The board was stunned. Karen looked like she might spontaneously combust. My victory was complete. The tyranny of the HOA was temporarily crushed by an 18-ton, British-made heavy utility tractor. Word count: 4,000. The day after the town hall showdown felt like a national holiday in the Gables. The silence from the HOA was deafening, the peace broken only by the occasional horn toot from a driver pausing to snap a photo of Karen's bane. The tank was now officially a community landmark. It was a constant, glorious reminder that the people had pushed back against the petty tyranny of beige conformity. 2 days later, I was cleaning off the hull when I saw the familiar black and white cruiser of Officer Davis and Officer Miller roll slowly up my driveway. This time, no lights were flashing. They just parked and walked over. "Mr. Wallace," Officer Davis said, her face still professional, but a faint twitch around her lips betrayed her amusement. "Officers, everything all right? No reports of illegal heavy yard work in the area?" I asked, wiping down the gun turret housing. Purely decorative, of course. "No, sir, no illegal yard work," Davis confirmed. "We were just on patrol. Miller here," she nudged her partner, "had a question." Officer Miller stepped forward, pulling out his cell phone. His professional demeanor was completely gone. He was beaming. "Mr. Wallace, I'm retired in 6 months. Now, I understand this FV432 is a MCO2. My brother-in-law, he's a collector. He wanted to know, did you have to get a special waiver for the road use rubber pads, or did they come with the Texas title?" We spent the next 15 minutes talking not about bylaws or citations, but about the mechanical specifics of the FV432. It was a bizarre, yet perfectly fitting interaction. 2 agents of law enforcement admiring a completely ridiculous, legally compliant vehicle parked illegally on a patch of grass. Before leaving, Officer Miller asked for a photo, which Officer Davis reluctantly took. "Just for the squad room, sir," Miller said, grinning. "A picture of the most legally compliant vehicle in the county." "You got it, officer," I replied. With the legal battle won, it was time to move to the next phase, weaponizing irony. The APC was drab green. Approved earth tone. It was legal, but it was boring. I decided to use the HOA's own aesthetic guidelines against them one last time, with a vengeance. I looked up the other approved colors. The list was a festival of muted despair. Muted clay, symphony of taupe, desert, sand, misty gray. The colors were designed to be inoffensive to the point of invisibility. I called in a new set of contractors. Not Al's Heavy Haul or Green Thumb guys, but Pimp My Tank, an actual custom auto detailing company that specializes in oversized, bizarre vehicles. The owner, a very enthusiastic guy named Rico, showed up in a pristine, neon green pickup. He was the antithesis of the Gables aesthetic. "So, Chad," Rico said, looking at the APC like it was a blank canvas. "What's the vision? Chrome? Flames? Maybe some skull decals?" "Rico, the vision is compliance," I explained, pulling out the official HOA paint chart. "I need you to paint this entire 18-ton utility vehicle in Symphony of Taupe." Rico blinked. "Taupe? That is the color of disappointment." "Exactly, but it's an approved color. However, Rico, I want you to apply it in a way that maximizes visibility. Think disruptive camouflage. Not to hide, but to shock." Rico smiled, a truly evil, artistic smile. "I got taught you. We use the taupe, but we use it in a matte, ultra-flat finish that absorbs all light, making it look like a giant block of chalk. Then we'll use muted clay, the next lightest approved earth tone, for all the trim, but we'll apply it in a high-gloss, ultra-reflective sheen. It will look like a giant, blindingly shiny beige Rubik's Cube." The result, a week later, was magnificent. The FV432, now a stunning piece of ironic suburban art, sat on my lawn. It was technically 100% compliant with the approved earth tone palette, but the taupe was so flat, it looked like a photographic void, and the clay trim was so glossy it reflected the sun like a beacon. It was jarring, unsettling, and perfectly legal. It screamed, "Ugly, but on the approved spectrum." My neighbors loved it. My nemesis, Karen, did not. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a cold drink next to my newly painted, highly reflective, legally compliant tank, when I saw the distinct sight of a "for sale" sign being hammered into the lawn across the street. It was Karen's house. I watched as Karen emerged from her front door, pulling a suitcase behind her. She looked exhausted, defeated, and, worst of all, beige. She stopped, looked across the street at me, then at the enormous, absurdly taupe tank that had ruined her life. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. The spirit of the neighborhood had been broken, but the soul had been restored. I simply lifted my hand, waved slowly, and raised my cold drink in a final, silent salute to the departed HOA president. She got into a waiting car and drove away, never looking back. The tank stayed. Karen's bane had done its job. I often get asked if I still have the FV432. Absolutely. It's part of the family now. We celebrate its anniversary every year with a small, quiet, and extremely loud gathering. The HOA, after Karen's ignominious departure, devolved into a kind of benign anarchy. The new president is that quiet, CPA, and he mostly just sends emails about the annual picnic and keeps the fine book locked in a safe. The bylaws were amended, not to ban the tank, but to drastically reduce the HOA's power over aesthetic choices, specifically removing the unbecoming appearance and color palette clauses entirely. They are now limited to structural safety and garbage disposal rules. Freedom reigns. And the tank? Karen's bane is now the unofficial mascot of the Gables. Tourists, and there are still tourists, stop by to take pictures. The neighbors' kids treat it like an extremely cool, immovable playground structure. I still fire up the engine sometimes, always during the day, so I don't incur that old, excessive noise fine, just to hear that beautiful, world-ending diesel rumble. I kept old Betsy, by the way. She's now parked safely in my garage, getting all the love and maintenance she deserves. I still drive her for actual utility purposes, and nobody says a word. Sometimes, the only way to beat a system built on petty, arbitrary rules is to follow those rules to the point of utter absurdity. You can't fight bureaucracy with logic. You have to fight it with a street-legal, 18-ton, track-based utility vehicle. And that, my friends, is how you get a military vehicle past the suburban fashion police. Just make sure you get the extended warranty.